Welcome back, boys and girls. Today I'm going to be giving my opinion about .NET Aspire. It is a new technology, very exciting, very easy to be excited and forget about, well, what are the actual negatives. And that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So don't forget, if you're enjoying it, leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section. I have a C# course that is out. If you would like to know C# as I did, I highly recommend you take a look at it. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So there isn't going to be any code for this video. We're just going to take a look at the documentation. There are a bunch of samples out there. I'm pretty sure most of you are already familiar with .NET Aspire, what it is, and in case you're not, here is my explanation. So the word soup that they give you for describing what .NET Aspire is .NET Aspire is an opinionated cloud-ready stack building observable production-ready distributed application container, blockchain, you know, the standard stuff, microservices. I can't believe microservices are not in here. Anyway, this stuff doesn't matter over here. The things that Aspire is actually consisting of is, first of all, it's going to be orchestration. This is effectively you being able to say, okay, I have service 1, and then it is talking to service 2. We then have components. These are the way that you effectively hook into your project, or you're able to define what kind of service you want. If there is no component for some kind of service, let's say I create my own service that I want to be part of the Aspire ecosystem, I will need to create my own component so people can start referencing it in the orchestration. And then we have the tooling, which I think is the worst part about .NET Aspire, from specific integration in Visual Studio without the .NET CLI support. For doing the same thing. You probably don't need it, but basically the reason .NET Aspire exists is because developers were saying that it is very hard to get to the cloud, or it is very hard to deploy to the cloud. So they give you extra buttons to wire up projects together in your orchestration project in Visual Studio. So you get like special buttons, you know, it's like you're in a wheelchair and you're getting pushed. So with this, there's going to be a lot of people are just saying, okay, I need to click this and that in this sequence. And then as long as I put this code in this shape, everything is going to work. People are not actually going to understand what the heck it is that they're doing. I know it may sound silly, but that is effectively how some people write code and build systems. So anyway, now that we kind of have an overview of the three things that .NET Aspire consists of, and by the way, some of the tooling is okay. We're basically going to talk about it. If we go to resources and we go to samples, we're going to find a project like this, and this is a microservices example. We have the two Aspire projects over here. We have app host and service defaults, and all of the other projects, let's label them 1, 2, 3, 4, are meant to be part of our microservices, okay, to assemble a system. How do you usually go about expressing what does your system look like? Well, let's say I have a front end over here, number 4. You can use Lucidchart for something like this, but you then have the catalog service. So it's very logical that the front end is going to be talking to the catalog service to retrieve the products. And then we have a catalog DB, right? So some kind of database, this is going to be over here. And the catalog service is going to be talking to the database. We then have a basket service, and it is just sitting over here. And because it's a microservice scenario, it's going to be separate from the catalog service, and the front end is going to have to call it as well. So maybe it talks to the database like this, maybe it talks to the database through the catalog service. Let's say that the arrow is over here and it talks to the database directly, although catalog DB suggests that basket service and catalog DB is only for the catalog service, right? So basket service might have something else. So anyway, here is a way to express what the system may look like. I've drawn a bunch of circles and arrows, so effectively component and how that component relates to another component or another service, right? So just responsibilities and relationships to fulfill some kind of system, some kind of requirement, okay? So closing that, let's go ahead, open app host. We're going to open program CS, and here is the same definition, but instead of circles, you get C# code. So let's go ahead, bring back the painting and see how close I managed to get it. So the catalog PostgreSQL container, this is a database. This is not our catalog DB project, which was number 2. We also have the front end over here, number 4, which does point to the basket service, which is number 1, and the catalog service, which is number 3. The number 2 over here is actually pointing to catalog DB. So we're going to mark it as number 5, and this is pointing to number 5. We're going to have another service over here, and this is pointing to this. It looks like I drew the arrow in reverse. But anyway, here we have the basket service, and the basket service was number 3, and it's, this was number 1. And this is pointing at basket cache. So this is number 6 over here. I'm going to draw it here because I'm somehow strangely running out of space. And the basket service is in no way relating to number 2 over here, which was the catalog app. Okay, so this was number 6. And then we have the catalog service over here, which is our number 3, which is talking to the database. So number 2 is talking to 5. And upon closer inspection of the code, number 2 is actually more of like seeding or managing your catalog. So this arrow isn't here either. It more goes like this, right? So number 3 is reading, number 2 is writing to the database. Number 1 has its own database, which is just Redis, and then still number 4 is talking to number 1 and 3. So we were quite close, but not at all close. So in terms of the projects that you have in your solution, it is not a very accurate way to determine how your system looks like. However, reading the same old C# code, I can say, okay, this is what this service is going to look like. And this is good. This is such a good thing about .NET Aspire that it gives you this. The only thing that I would wish is that I would actually have, if you've ever used Lucidchart, why can I not just use Lucidchart to mark up these containers and instead of C# code effectively get the same expression? Because in the end, both this or this could boil down to the same data structure. Let's say it's going to be JSON, okay? Now, when you're working with Aspire locally, you're going to run the app host container, and it is going to effectively simulate this infrastructure for you, okay? Spinning up Docker containers in the background, loading the apps, and injecting all of the variables that you need in order for these services to communicate with each other. So for example, it sees that, okay, you have defined a basket cache and you have registered the basket cache with the basket service. I'm going to inject a connection string into the basket service, and when you're referring to a basket cache in your basket service, I'm going to surface that injected connection string. Locally, that is how that is being resolved. Now, when you're actually going to take it to the production, Aspire doesn't do any deployment. All it does is it says, okay, here's the JSON for how this is meant to look like. So the final JSON is just going to say that number 1 is going to need a connection to number 6, and the same for everything else. Okay, so because it only says that these actions or these things should be fulfilled when you're deploying or when you're provisioning environment, .NET Aspire as a system definition or a system expression actually sits in a narrow space between 2 places. It sits between IaC, infrastructure as code, and deployment. So I'm just gonna mark that as dep, okay, deployment. So you have your 2 circles over here. Let's start with the left. Infrastructure as code. You effectively are gonna have to spin up containers, some kind of specific cloud services and other things, and effectively move these circles into their respective places. These things might not be crossing the physical boundary, they might be in the same place, and might be just purely logical boundaries, so they might be containing on one box. However, you don't get a say in that, so this is where you're going to use the tooling to effectively generate this infrastructure as code, and currently it is going to get generated under the hood into something called Bicep. and this is Azure specific infrastructure as code. So Bicep is a language that allows you to define infrastructure. Other things that are like this are Terraform. I'm just going to put T in here because I don't want to spell out Terraform. And then you also have Pulumi. Pulumi is almost like this. You are effectively doing exactly the same as Aspire is doing. You can write C# and you are getting your infrastructure like this, okay? And again, infrastructure as code, a lot of people get it wrong. They are trying to use infrastructure as code for deployment, okay? So they will actually use this to deploy services to their production, which is not entirely correct because deployment can sometimes be very complicated. But anyway, on to the problem with this. So this story over here in terms of just saying, okay, my services look like this. I don't care what my infrastructure looks like, just make sure that I have this from the services that I have defined. Chances are what is actually going to happen is you're going to have a component here, and a component here, effectively like a membrane around the IAC, which is non-definable by .NET Aspire. And it's going to be like a hole that once you are actually generating this IAC, you're going to have to fill that hole. And what's going to happen is you're going to have bridges, stitches in order to some kind of hack. So this over here is going to be a hack in order to effectively facilitate this kind of communication in case you need to bridge to services which are not supported by .NET Aspire. The reason this is a problem currently because it's generating Bicep, this is only supported for the Azure infrastructure, even though that the medium is actually JSON. So first of all, you get JSON and then you get Bicep. Effectively, Amazon or Google Cloud can generate their own versions of Bicep. Pulumi and Terraform providers can effectively say, okay, we're going to take this JSON and we're going to generate the appropriate code so you can actually then take it and deploy that infrastructure. But there is a lot of work for this orange membrane that needs to happen in order to include it into the Aspire ecosystem, okay? And even then, because it's all integrated so deeply with Bicep currently to deploy it, you are effectively locked in to the Microsoft ecosystem, from the C# code rewrite to the tools that you use to deploy to Microsoft Cloud, okay? And if you put all of your eggs in one basket, there's plenty of studies on that. It's not an entirely good thing to do, okay? So on the other side, glorious deployment. It's the way that you get from your code to the infrastructure. I don't know how many of you do one-click deployments from your computer personally. It is almost always a pipeline, and if you're going to have tons of microservices, currently the tooling can allow you to say which one you want to deploy, or by default it's just going to deploy everything. It doesn't do any change tracking, it doesn't have any concepts of versioning to basically figure out is this a newer version of the service, etc. You cannot split it into effectively building your software, publishing a container, and then waiting some time to then deploy that container. There is no way to support effectively gradual deployment. So let's say I want only 5% of my containers to be this new build to check out. Does it actually work? Is it going to break in production? Then I want to roll it back. Rollbacks, not supported. So the deployment story for .NET Aspire tooling is bad. Okay, it's literally just a stupid push, as simple as it gets. The problem with just a forward push is that the story looks like this. There are no points where you can say, okay, we're doing this first phase, second phase, and if something goes here, the damage over here is minimal. If you just straight ahead go to, well, just push to production and deploy, and something goes wrong along the way, or you forget to deploy another service, and now you get corrupt state, there is no way for you to roll back or even say what version. You're going to have to go open up Azure, Azure dashboard, and you're going to have to go scroll through, okay, which container revision I deployed last time, and roll it back, okay? So a lot of mess on my screen. What do I think needs to happen? I think that .NET Aspire doesn't need to touch the deployment side. It effectively needs to lean to the left side towards IAC, and then effectively just be able to produce or help produce those build artifacts that you're then going to distribute through whatever other deployment mechanisms that you have. because indeed, by having a service definition, you should be a little bit closer to the infrastructure. Okay, here is my system. How does my system actually run? Okay, and then the deployment side, there should be completely separate tooling for actually pushing your applications to production. Because right now, .NET Aspire does sit in the middle of those, and then there is extra tooling to effectively pad those two. And this is how the diagram looks like, right? So if you haven't seen or tried to use AZD up, once you are in your project over here, in your eShop Lite at the root of your solution, you run this command AZD up, and what it's going to do is it's going to produce this JSON, this intermediary format. Number two is going to produce the bicep file, which is then, bicep ARM. That was ridiculous naming. Anyway, ARM Azure Resource Management. Bicep manages Azure. I don't know. This is hilarious. Anyway, you produce the bicep over here, and then you're pushing infrastructure changes. So AZD deploy then runs. So you effectively get a big shebang, right? So the provisioning and deployment in AZD up is not even separated. You can run them separately, and you should be avoiding a command like this, because if you've changed your services and somehow maybe tweaked a little bit your infrastructure, and AZD provision starts thinking, oh, well, you no longer need this database over here, you need it over there, let me delete all of your data, right? You don't want that. So you want to be a little bit careful with the AZD up, and you want to be mindful when you are just provisioning your infrastructure. This is effectively the foundation. The foundation moves slower than the applications on it. It's two different swim lanes. And again, the deployment doesn't really give you a lot of control. I think what it should do is it should do these two things. It shouldn't actually go, okay, boom, a straight away update. This part over here about how do you actually roll out your change, because once you're producing a Docker image, you're pushing it to your container registry. This is just artifact production. The actual rollout, the getting it deployed, getting it live, sometimes super simple. Pushing it is sometimes all you need. But it's the time where you need that control to effectively, okay, how slowly or how fast do I want to deploy it? Do I want to be able to roll back? Currently, I don't think, from reading about AZD deploy, this doesn't give it to you. It's a simple push. And again, the tool AZD deploy, if you just use it on its own, the audit trail of which services you deployed when to your production, that kind of stuff is important at times, and it doesn't really give you that. You're going to end up using pipelines, you're going to end up using some kind of services that give you that, and that is going to be something internal, or it's going to be a step in one of those. So deployment is still going to look a little bit more complicated in specific places. And just briefly cycling back to the deployment problem, if we come back over here where I was talking about, we are generating this JSON blob over here that effectively just says how the services wire up, or that's how we figure out where to populate these variables and stuff like that. Currently, all of this setup happens during IaC, and it gets placed into environment variables. If your deployment, if you are embedding this sort of configuration into your app settings or any other way that is not done specifically how .NET Aspire wants you to do it, you're effectively the same way that Pulumi and Terraform are going to have to build some kind of integration in order to deploy infrastructure from this JSON. You're going to have to build for your deployment, or other providers, I don't know, like Octopus or something like that. They will need to be able to take this JSON and say, okay, you have the following configuration. We're going to build some kind of engine that is going to take this JSON, take this configuration, and then be able to spit out the correct deployment. So again, this is another piece of work that the vendor is going to have to do. So is all of that headache really worth for getting this? Okay, currently, my opinion is no. If you have a bunch of infrastructure as code and you want to try to take Aspire and effectively try to cram it into there, and then change the ways that you deploy to the way that .NET Aspire wants you to deploy, effectively having a lot of bridges between various technologies integrating, and because it's a bridge and technologies move at different speeds, you know there's gonna be drift. Bridges are going to effectively break, and it's already quite an annoying problem where it's a simple one-to-one integration and a tool that is specialized in integrating with a service sometimes breaks. So this is not an uncommon thing. And in my opinion, .NET Aspire is, well, it's trying to do both IaC, stand in the middle, and the deployment story. If you have a very simple service like what they are doing in the demos, Blazor app, a backend, perhaps some kind of other node service where you're just going to need to say, okay, this is how the services are wiring up, and you don't need to integrate it with any other infrastructure. You don't need to worry about deployments. Effectively, if your system is very simple, at that point, I think .NET Aspire is going to be that silver bullet where it's like, wow, I can't believe how easy it is. Otherwise, if you're building a complex system, well, effectively a microservice system, I personally don't think that .NET Aspire is going to be the tool to manage this complexity. But anyway, enough of my ranting. Thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what you think about .NET Aspire. Have you tried it? Do you think it's going to be good, bad? What do you think it's missing? What are your observations? Please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear it. As always, thank you very much for watching. A big and special thank you goes out to my Patreon supporters. You help me make these videos. If you would like the source code, not for this video, but all my other videos, please come support me on Patreon. As always, thank you for watching and have a good day.